just celebrated the 4th of July. I don't know if you remember this, but we kind of just did. And, in the Declaration of Independence, it starts off by saying the words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal, are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights." And I think about this and think, that's really funny because we all hear that. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. I don't know if there's any less self-evident proposition than that. I mean, honestly, look around, even this room. If you just look at people, we are not equal. There's some people who are taller than others. Some people are stronger than others. Some people are smarter than others. Some people are nicer than others. Some people are cooler than others, right over there. Very clear. I mean, in some ways, you could say some people are just better than others. That's not, yeah. And some people are funnier than others, just like one of those things. So, but it's crazy because we all just hear that and we accept it, which is bananas. Do you realize that there's never, ever been a culture, a civilization that has ever believed that? Let's pause on this. There has never been a culture, a civilization that has ever believed that all human beings are created equal. But we hear it and we're like, duh, move on. So we have to understand this. We have to understand that this idea, we hold these truths to be self-evident, all human beings are created equal. This comes from somewhere. It is not self-evident. Question, where does this come from? It comes from one source and one source alone. And it's really remarkable because oftentimes, some of the people submitted some questions for this talk. And a lot of times the people are like, well, sometimes in the questions, it's like, I'm sometimes embarrassed to be Catholic. Sometimes I feel this sense of I don't know if I can go along with all the Catholic beliefs. Do you realize the source, the foundation of Western civilization, the foundation of the idea that all human beings are created equal has one source, and that source is ultimately the Catholic Church. Because let's look at this book. This book's called the Bible. And the very first book of the Bible is known as, I say Genesis, but yeah, we'll say it like you say it. Genesis, yes. And the very first 2 chapters of Genesis make unbelievable claims. One of the first claims the first chapter of Genesis makes is that God then made human beings, male and female, in his image and likeness. Very first page, very first chapter, the very first book of the Bible makes this claim that God made human beings, male and female, in his own image and likeness. That's the source of our assertion that all human beings are created equal. If I say I'm going to discard this, then you better find a way to validate the claim that all human beings are created equal. Because there's no other source. There's no other foundation. There's no other proof, essentially, that human beings are created equal. Because either we're all equal because God made us, and so we have inestimable worth. Again, either we're all equal because God made us, and your worth is through the roof, or we are all equal because we're all equally accidents, and our worth is 0. Does that make sense? If God exists and you're made in God's image and likeness, like the Bible says, like the Catholic Church teaches, then you are, and everyone you know and everyone you don't know, born, unborn, weak, strong, healthy, sick, brilliant, mentally incapacitated, have inestimable worth if God exists and if the Catholic Church is true. But if God doesn't exist, then we're all just stuff and have no worth. We're all equal, but equally worthless because we're all equally accidents with no inherent meaning. Unless someone finds you useful or unless someone finds that they prefer you. Does that make sense? These are our only 2 options. Either God made you in his image and likeness and you have inestimable worth, or you're an accident and you have 0 worth. The only 2 options we have. So when people say, like, I don't know if I believe all the things the Catholic Church teaches, okay, let's go to this first one. Are you willing to say that all human beings are not created equal? So the reality, I mean, some part of this talk is getting to this place where we talk about like things like racism or things like sexism. You don't have to talk about those things if you just believe what the Catholic Church teaches. Because if you're Catholic, you believe what the Catholic Church teaches, then I don't care who you meet or how different they look on the surface, how different they are inside, how different, what their attractions, their lack of attractions, whatever the thing is. You're like, oh, people are human beings. Every human being is an individual, and every individual is made in God's image and likeness. Therefore, it's impossible to be Catholic and be racist. It's just it. It's because you would be a living contradiction. You'd be a living contradiction to be able to say at the same time, God made every human being with inestimable dignity in his image and likeness, except for those human beings over there. Makes no sense. It's impossible to, I mean, just think, oh gosh, I'm getting ahead of myself. I just get too excited. Let's go back to the beginning. You realize the idea of so before Christianity, before Judaism and Christianity came on the scene, what you have is you have worth based on who you belong to. You have worth based on your group. You have worth based on your community. That's where your worth comes from. Not because you're an individual who has individual worth. You have worth only based off of your group's worth, your community's worth. What Christianity, Judeo-Christianity, introduced to the world is the discovery of the individual. Sorry, I said it like this. The discovery of the individual, but it's true. There was no such thing as the value of the individual until Genesis 1. Because until Genesis 1, people might have value because you belong to our tribe. You have value because you belong to our clan. You have value because you look like us. But Judeo-Christianity introduced the discovery of the individual. That even if no one else claims you, God claims you. Even if no one else prefers you, the Lord God delights in you. Even if no one else affirms your value, everyone who belongs to the Lord, every Judeo-Christian, has to say, regardless of your strengths, your weaknesses, whether you're a burden or whether you are someone who lifts people's burdens, you have inestimable value. Amen? So Genesis 1, Genesis 2, talking about the dignity of human beings. And this is interesting because if the Bible ended with Genesis chapter 2, where here's the man and the woman, and they're naked without shame, they have nothing to hide from each other, that'd be great. Great story. Also a shorter Bible. It would have been like the Bible in a day. But unfortunately, there's a chapter 3 to Genesis, and in chapter 3 of Genesis, what it talks about is the serpent comes into the garden, right? And we all know the story, so I'm just going to summarize. Basically, everything breaks. Now here's the tree, here's the fruit, here's what eating, and then basically, the man and the woman, they realize they're naked and they begin to hide themselves. Why? Because in that moment, the moment of brokenness, did I summarize that okay? You guys still tracking with me on the Adam and Eve, how that story went? Okay, so in this moment of brokenness, they begin to make loincloths for themselves. Why? Because they realize there's something in this other person's eyes that's willing to use me. Before this, God put us equal, beauty, love, united, so good. Still good afterwards, but now we're broken. Our relationship with God has been broken. Our relationship with each other is broken. We're even broken in ourselves. And so the first thing Adam and Eve do is they make loincloths for themselves. Why? Because I see something in your eyes. You're willing to use me. Before, Adam and Eve are united. Now they have this tenuous relationship with each other, where the man is willing to use the woman is willing to use the man. And this extends to the whole family. I mean, we know the next story in Genesis, right? After Adam and Eve eat of the fruit, there's brokenness. What's the next story is they have two kids. What are their names? Kane and Abel. What happens? Well, here's Cain who offers a sacrifice and God doesn't accept it. Here's Abel offers a sacrifice, God accepts it. So Cain is jealous of Abel. Why? Because that's how we do this. We have this thing of like, oh, someone else is preferred. When I don't know my own value, when I don't know my own worth, when I don't realize that here's God who declares over you that you are have inestimable value, you're worth dying for, then someone else gets honored. That takes away from me. That's how life works. If someone else is lifted up, that must mean I'm lifted down. Lifted down? Put down. If someone else is worth a lot, that means I must be worth less. So here's Cain, and he resents Abel. And even God comes to him and says, why are you so crestfallen? Why are you so angry? Listen, you don't have to be. You can actually fight that. Fight that thing in you that wants to say, Abel is other. Abel's the enemy. No, he's not your enemy. He's your brother. But what does Cain do? Takes him out to a field, picks up a rock, kills his brother. Think about this. The first sin is Adam and Eve eat some forbidden fruit. The second sin is a brother kills his brother. That escalated quickly. But that's the brokenness. That's the brokenness of, if anything, captures where we are in our world. Is that you have these two people who are actually brothers. They're actually brothers, but they don't see each other as brothers. They made the other their enemy. You know, actually, in those people who are part of the Human Genome Project, right? Those who have tracked the genetic code of the humanity, they recently, within the last 10, 15 years, they have pointed to the reality that the first pages of Genesis are accurate. That we actually come from one set of parents. Which means what? Ultimately, we literally are all brothers and sisters. Let's go back to Cain and Abel. They were literally brothers. They treated each other, or Cain treated his brother, like the other. Like someone who's his enemy. This is a room full of brothers and sisters. This is a world full of brothers and sisters. That's why racism is stupid. Because you have some lighter brothers, you have some darker brothers, you have some lighter sisters, you have some darker sisters, but they're your sisters. They're your brothers. Not just spiritually, genetically. Saint Mother Teresa, she said the reason we have so little peace in this world is because we've forgotten that we belong to each other. We've forgotten that we belong to each other. That's the very second story in the Bible. What does Cain say? God comes looking for Abel, and God asks Cain, he says, where's your brother Abel? And he asks the question, am I my brother's keeper? Remember that story, that part, that question he asked? Am I my brother's keeper? God could say, no, Cain, you're not your brother's keeper. You are your brother's brother. You're more than his keeper. You are his brother. But you're his brother who has become his murderer. And this is what happens every time we don't treat each other like we belong to each other. So it happens every time here's the fancy word. It happens every time we other the other. Does that make sense? Because why? Because the reason we have no peace is because we've forgotten that we belong to each other. And the crazy thing is, like, I think it's really easy to look at the brokenness in our world right now and look at the oppression in this world right now and say, well, that's because of the people with power. It's the people who have power. If they just change, if they just rewrote laws, then we'd be fine. I don't know if that's true. If there are laws to be rewritten, yes, definitely. But it's not just about the people with power. Here's what I mean. In the book of Kings, first book of Kings, there's this story about someone with power. His name is King Ahab. King Ahab is not a good guy. He's married to a woman named Jezebel. Jezebel is not a good gal. At one point, King Ahab just like, my nose itched, and I was like, let's make a bigger deal out of that than it should be. King Ahab, at one point, he sees this guy's name is Naboth. This is 1 Kings chapter 21. Naboth has a vineyard. Ahab is the king. He wants Naboth's vineyard. So Ahab goes to Naboth and says, hey, I can buy your vineyard, or even I can swap some land with you. I'll even give you a better vineyard than you have right now. And Naboth says, well, this land's been in my family for years. I'm not going to trade. And it says this. It says, well then, Ahab went home disturbed and angry at the answer Naboth the Jezreelite had made him. I will not give you my ancestral heritage. So lying down on his bed, he turned away from food and would not eat. Jezebel, his wife, walks in. She says, why are you so angry? You won't eat. Come on down, honey. We have supper for you. It's okay. And Ahab says, well, I spoke to Naboth the Jezreelite and said to him, sell me your vineyard. If you prefer, I'll give you my vineyard in exchange. But he refused to let me have his vineyard. So his wife says, fine ruler over Israel you are. Listen, get up, eat, be cheerful. Sweetie, it's going to be okay. I'm going to make it all better. So Jezebel, she wrote letters in Ahab's name, and having sealed them with his seal, sent them to the elders and nobles who lived in the same city with Naboth. Is what she said. Proclaim a fast and set Naboth at the head of the people. Next, get 2 scoundrels to face him and accuse him of having cursed God and the king. Then take him out and stone him to death. So his fellow citizens, the elders and nobles who dwelt in the city, did as Jezebel had ordered them in writing through the letters she sent to them. They proclaimed a fast, put Naboth at the head of the people. 2 scoundrels came in and confronted him with the accusation. Then they led him out of the city and stoned him to death. See, Ahab and Jezebel are not good people. They're bad people. They're the people in power, right? The people with power. They're the king and the queen. Do you realize that none of that, Naboth would not have ever been killed if the elders and nobles of the city had gotten these letters from the king and from the queen and said, well, no. Hey, accuse Naboth of doing something wrong and then kill him. If just the normal people, if just the ordinary citizens were to say, yeah, I'm not going to do that. If they just would have said, I'm not going to go along with how things are. I'm not going to go along with the people in power. People in power wouldn't have any power. Does that make sense? I've heard it said that the only thing that allows the advancement of evil is when good people do nothing. If I belong to my brother, then he can't be my enemy. If I belong to my sister, then she can't be my enemy. If we're actually part of the same family, then we have to be part of the same family. Here's the problem. The problem is we think, well, if I was in that position, if I was in Naboth's village, in his city, if I would gotten a letter saying, hey, you need to accuse Naboth and go out and kill him, I would never do that. You'd have to be awful. You'd have to be horrible to do that. Listen, you would do that. You would do that. At least you have the capacity to do that. Sometimes people, again, they go back to, say, World War II. They go back to Nazi Germany. And they look at the things that the Germans did to the Jews, to the Poles, to the Catholics. You say, man, I would never, if I was someone living in Germany, I would never have participated. I would never have cooperated with the Nazis. Yes, you would have. Yes, you would have. Especially if in the last 2 years, you've just gone along with the story that the media has told you. You post all the things they tell you to post. You never stand up and question, wait, is that accurate? You would have. The challenge, of course, the reality, of course, is what? There's a great, incredible book. It's called Ordinary Men. It's a story of the 101st Police Guard. In 1942, there were 500 people in the police guard. They were Germans, roughly 40 to 50 years old. So not like young. They weren't conscripted into the army. Gestapo had rounded up 1,500 Jews, mostly women, children, and infants, the elderly as well. And they talked to these 500 policemen. Again, just normal, ordinary Germans. No different than you and I. And they said, okay, listen, we have to get rid of all these Jews. Here's what we need you to do. We're going to lie them down on the ground. All you have to do is take your rifle, put the bayonet back in the back of their heads, back of their necks, and just pull the trigger. We need to get rid of these people. If you don't want to do this, you can leave. They even told them, if you don't want to do this, you can leave. These are policemen. I mean, think about this. These are people who have actually volunteered, not full-time police. These are people who have volunteered to say, you know what? My community needs me at times. So I'm going to be like on the reserve list. Like I'm not like full-time police, but when people need help, I want to be there when people need help. 500 of them, the Gestapo said, if you don't want to participate, you can go. It's okay. We're not going to make you do this. 12 guys left out of 500. The rest of them, they lined up these bodies and they walked up, put their bayonet to the back of the necks of these women, these old people, these infants, pulled the trigger. Over the course of the entire day, only 20% of them stopped doing it. It is crazy. This is crazy. The reason why they stopped doing it is because they experienced physical revulsion, like they wanted to throw up. 20 years later, they even asked them, like, why did you stop? The people who stopped. They could have said, I realized it was wrong. None of them said that. They all just said, I just wanted to throw up. I couldn't do it anymore. There was a guy, he had said, the way he rationalized this, he killed the babies. Because he said his buddy would kill the moms. So he rationalized, this child would be left to fend for itself, and I don't want it to have to live in a world without its mom, so I'm doing it a favor. If you don't think that could be you, you don't know yourself. I already said racism is stupid. But if you don't think you could get to the point where you other someone because of their race, then you don't know yourself. Sexism is stupid. If you don't think you can other the other gender, then you don't know yourself. All those isms, they're all stupid because we know the truth. We belong to each other. We all have inestimable worth, inestimable value. But if you don't think that we live in a broken world where even the best among us could find ourselves in a situation where we were willing to persecute and other anybody, we don't know ourselves. Because here's the thing, the crazy thing is, here's the church. I don't know if you know about this. In 1530, the Pope at the time, what happened in 1492? There's a guy whose name, sailed across the ocean blue, right? So in 1492, Columbus comes to the New World for the Europeans. 50-ish years later, the Pope at the time, 40 years later, the Pope at the time I can't get my dates right, you guys, 1531, the Pope writes this papal bull called Sublimus Deus. The Pope says, hey, there's this whole people that we didn't even know existed. You know, we met people from Africa, we met people from the Middle East, people from Norway, we met people from Asian continent. We didn't even have any idea there was North, Central, South America. Here's the Pope who writes and says, okay, I know you've discovered for Europeans this new world. You may not oppress this people. You may not enslave this people. You may not treat these people as less than people. And the Pope is saying very clearly right away when they discovered this people, we didn't even know they existed. Or they didn't, I wasn't there. I'm old, but not that old. Thanks. I moisturize, it's fine. But here's the Holy Father, the one with all the power, saying, if you are a Catholic Christian, these people, he says this, these people are your brothers and your sisters. And so we're only called to share the gospel with them. You may not oppress them. You know what people did? They just ignored it, yeah. Just ignored it. It's what we sometimes do. I don't like this or that teaching of the church. I'm just going to ignore it. All it takes for evil to persist is for good people to do nothing. I mean, even think about this crazy. When it comes to slavery, what's fascinating is as long as humanity has existed, slavery has existed. I don't know if you knew that. It wasn't like an invention of the last couple hundred years. As long as humanity has existed, there's been slavery. Slavery was so pervasive that 400 years ago, 300, 200 years ago, the idea of a world without slavery was inconceivable. It was inconceivable. It was inconceivable. You keep saying that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. Yeah, I had to do something, right? So, but along comes this guy. His name's William Wilberforce. I don't know if you heard of William Wilberforce. He was born in the 1700s in England. The England in which William Wilberforce was raised was rough. We'll say it like that. He was the youngest person ever to be elected to Parliament. He graduated from university, got elected to Parliament. But at the time, Parliament would meet. Everyone would just show up drunk. Like literally, they would have entire sessions of Parliament where people are just wasted. People making the laws. I hear you. This is the next thing we're going to do. So alcoholism was rampant. Alcoholism was everywhere. In the England in which William Wilberforce came into Parliament, they had a thing called bear baiting. So in London, they bring bears in, and they just have like dogs attack bears to see like how many dogs does it take to kill a bear. Just watch it, you guys. That's entertainment for us. They would have public executions because people just want to watch. I want to watch someone die. It's a criminal, so why not? Kind of fun. That was entertainment. After the execution, they'd have public autopsies. I want to see gross stuff. And we watched Saw and those other kind of movies. They watched the real thing. In London, when William Wilberforce was in Parliament, 25% of all single women were prostitutes. Pause on this. In London, 25% of all single women were prostitutes. The average age was 16. So we think like, oh, jolly old England. Yes, that's right. It was rough. And William Wilberforce was no better. He was no better than his culture. And then what happened was William Wilberforce encountered Jesus. Now, he was raised Christian, culturally Christian. People around him were like, yeah, we're Christian. We have the big church right next door to us, and most of us were baptized. But people weren't Christian in name only. William Wilberforce had this massive conversion. He took a trip from England all the way down to Rome and back by horse and buggy, like in a carriage, which I imagine takes a little bit longer than if you took an airplane. And his traveling companion was this brilliant man, a scientist who's also a Christian. And so for hundreds of hours as they're traveling to Rome and back, William Wilberforce was able to ask his questions about faith, about Jesus, about God, about life, about the world, about science. And this traveling companion, this friend of his, was able to answer these questions so much so that when William Wilberforce got back to England, he was like, I'm a Christian now, but he didn't know what to do. He was like, what do I do with this? Because I have this faith, but I also have this position. I have this faith, but I also have some power here. I have some influence in Parliament. Does God want me to leave Parliament and do something else? And he prayed for weeks and weeks. And after his prayer, he realized, okay, the rest of my life, I'm going to dedicate to two things. One is the reform of manners, meaning like those prostitutes, those people being killed in public, those, the bear baiting, that kind of thing. We need to do something about the culture. He said, the other thing I'm going to dedicate my entire life to is the abolition of the slave trade in the United Kingdom. Everything from that moment on in his life was about putting an end to slavery. Finally, in 1833, 2 weeks before William Wilberforce died, Parliament voted to abolish the slave trade in Great Britain. This, even more important. Remember this. As long as humanity has existed, slavery has existed. The idea of living in a world where slavery didn't exist was what? Inconceivable. Think about this now. Who now would say, oh gosh, you guys, we could never live in a world without slavery? Nobody, none of us. Slavery has become inconceivable. Why? Because there was one person who got together with two people, who got together with three people, who got together with a whole bunch of people, and they said, you know what? The world in which we live is brother killing brother. The world in which we live is sister oppressing sister. The world in which we live is we forget that we belong to each other. But what the scriptures teach, what the church teaches, is what we cannot forget, and we have to actually live out. Because it's not enough to just say something like, well, the first 2 chapters of Genesis say that all human beings are created equal, that we're made in God's image and likeness. We have to actually do something about that. We actually have to put that into our actions. Where does that start? I don't know that it starts with making new rules. I think it starts with having new hearts and having new eyes. I think it starts with realizing that here's Jesus, who has done what? Jesus has identified himself with us. You guys know who Our Lady of Guadalupe is? We love Our Lady of Guadalupe. I can't even say it. Our Lady of Guadalupe. Yeah. Question. What race is Our Lady of Guadalupe? Yes. I don't know if we say she's Mexicana, or if we say she's Latina, or whatever we say. Listen, she don't look like me. I can tell you that. She's not the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Mary from the movies. She has identified so fully with the people of Central and South America. She's like, no, I'm you. Hey, you know who Our Lady of Cabejo is? Our Lady of Cabejo appeared in Rwanda. Again, no blonde hair, no blue eyes. Our Lady of Cabejo is an African woman. Why? Because Mary is the mother of all of us. Not just the people who look like people from the Middle East. Have you heard of Our Lady of Lavang? One person has. Or they just wanted to get some attention. Our Lady of Lavang appeared in Vietnam. Guess what she looked like? She is Vietnamese. What are all these apparitions of Our Lady trying to tell us? That we belong to each other. That I've heard it said, and it's true, that Jesus does not identify with the Caucasian race. Jesus doesn't belong to the Hispanic race. Jesus doesn't belong to the Chinese race or Korean race or Vietnamese race. Jesus doesn't belong to the African race. Jesus belongs to the human race. This is so abundantly clear when in Matthew chapter 25, at the end of the whole story, Jesus tells the story and he says, at the end, the Master will show up, the Lord God will show up, and he will separate humanity like a shepherd separates sheep and the goats. To those on one side, he will say, come, you blessed of my Father. For I was naked and you clothed me. I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was naked again and you clothed me again. I was in prison and you visited me. I was in the hospital and you cared for me. And then people will say, wait, Lord, when did we see you naked and clothe you? When did we see you hungry and feed you? When did we see you thirsty and give you drink of water? And Jesus said what? As often as you did it for one of the least of my brethren, you did it to me. Whoever you think for you is the other, whoever you think is the one who's like, you're so different than me, I couldn't possibly love you. Jesus says, that's me. To those on his left, depart from me, you accursed. Jesus is too nice to say that. He's too good not to say that. Depart from me, you accursed, because I was naked and you didn't clothe me. I was hungry, you didn't feed me. I was in prison and hospital, you did not visit me. Lord, when did we see you and not tend to your needs? As often as you did not do it for one of the least of my brethren, you did not do it to me. My brothers and sisters, if we don't treat each other as brothers, as sisters, if we don't actually see each other as brothers and sisters, we cannot be Christians. It's just not true. It's not possible. So I don't care what the dividing line is. I don't care what the group is. We all belong to groups. That's true. It's just how life works, how humanity is. But how Christians are, how Christians see, is with new eyes. Now, here's someone who belongs to this group or that group. I don't care about your group. I only care about you. And if we don't, then we don't belong to him. Amen? So there's some questions here now. And we've got a couple minutes for them. Do we have minutes for the questions? There's the timer going on. Yeah, they're going to reset the timer for me. Because apparently I said, I only need 20 minutes. And then I took like 30. Sounds familiar. You guys, you know what happens is, I was telling the team yesterday that there's a lot of things I'm not good at. One of the things I'm really not good at is the announcement at the end of Mass. Yeah, I guess it's not that funny. But like, at one point, at one point I was asked to be an MC somewhere, like the master ceremonies, like to be the host or whatever, kind of like what Dan does. And I was like, oh, I'm really sorry, but I'm really not good at that. And they literally someone legit got mad at me. Like, how could you not be good at this? I'm like, I don't know. Let me be bad at stuff. I don't know. Okay. My family, I don't even have to probably screen these ahead of time. I don't know. My family is a mix of different religions. What are some of the best ways to show them my faith and what we believe as Catholics about stuff? We'll get to the stuff in just a second. Here's one of the things. It's a great question. We've forgotten how to listen to each other. I think we've forgotten how to listen to each other without jumping to conclusions. So the first thing I think we need to grow in or get better at is just that, just listening. For example, a lot of times when someone says, oh, I stand for X, we think, oh, I get it. No, I understand you already. I know what you're all about. Like, well, let them tell you what they're all about. Moving on. I don't know. There's more to say about this, but I would say if we learn how to listen to each other, that would be very helpful. Because there's others that are so good here too. That's just so general. Our families are supposed to be our biggest supporters. How do I love my family when they do things that hurt me? I'll say, yeah, maybe it's true that our families are supposed to be our biggest supporters. They're often not. They can be. If that's the case for your life, that's amazing. That's awesome. That's a gift. But I don't know if you know this. Jesus had said, I did not come to bring peace, but the sword. From now on, there will be father against son and son against father. There will be mother against daughter and daughter against mother. There will be daughter-in-law against mother-in-law and mother-in-law against daughter-in-law. There'll be brother against brother and sister against sister in the sense of this, in the sense that Jesus is actually dividing. Jesus is a dividing line. That if you're going to be Christian, not everyone's Christian. Why? Because you don't get born into the faith. You might be born into the faith, but you have to choose it at some point. And Christians believe things that not everyone believes. Because of that, you're going to experience division. You're going to experience opposition. You're going to experience this even in your own family. I mean, just think about the most recent court case in Dobbs and the recognition that as Catholics, this should be a joyful thing for all of us. Every single Catholic should be able to say, yeah, abortion is an evil. Wait, pause. Let's stop on this for a second. Why is abortion an evil? But wait, what about the life of the mother? Life of the mother is very important. Why? Because all human beings are created equal. But if all human beings are created equal, what's in her womb? A human being. Now, here's the interesting thing. We would say that's a human being. Well, that's the religious answer. Interesting that you say that. So, a couple things. I work on a campus with medical school. A couple years ago, there was a guy in medical school. And after the evening Sunday night mass, he came up to me. He was ramped up. He's like, Father, I wrote a manifesto. I'm going to send you my manifesto. I wrote a manifesto. I'm like, what's a manifesto? He's like, I was very So, okay, here's what happened. I was like, tell me, calm down, tell me. He's like, okay, so for 2 weeks, we had an embryology class. In an embryology class, we talked all about how the sperm fertilizes the egg and how it implants and how it grows, and this whole thing of like, here's this miracle of like this incredible way in which life begins in the womb and how it grows. And here's all the ways in which we as physicians can assist women who have conceived to bring that baby to term. It's just incredible, this gift of life. For 2 weeks, we talked about how this life is growing and this life is how it develops, how it gestates, all these things. And then the next section was involved in here's how you do an abortion. He said, wait a second, we spent 2 weeks talking about how this is life. It's not just any life. It's not like an avocado life. This isn't a chipmunk that becomes a baby when it passes the birth canal. That this is life from the moment of conception. What kind of life is it? Human life. Is that up for scientific debate? No. This is the crazy thing is that the reality that this is a human life from the moment of conception is not a scientific question. That is a scientific answer. The question is that life worthy of life? Because if we're going to say, it's life, but it's not life worthy of life. That was one of the mottos of the Nazi Party. Of course, Jews are lives. Of course, Jews are alive. But that's life not worthy of life. That's why you can put a gun to the back of their neck and pull the trigger. These people who are enslaved, of course they're alive, but that's not life worthy of life. That's why you can say, I'm a Christian and still own a slave. That baby in the womb it's life, but it's not life worthy of life. That's why we can say, I'm a Catholic and I support abortion. It is impossible to simultaneously say that every human being is made in God's image and likeness and is of inestimable worth and be for slavery. It is impossible to say that every human being has inestimable worth and made in God's image and likeness and throw them into the gas chamber. It is impossible to say every human being is made in God's image and likeness and has inestimable worth and be for abortion. It's impossible. And the issue is that's not a religious question. It's not a religious question. So for you and I to stand and say, no, we of course we support everyone. The mom, the baby, the father, whoever this is. Why? Because every one of them, she's my sister. He's my brother. That baby in the womb is my sister too. Am I my brother's keeper? No, you're not. You're your brother's brother. My sister's keeper? No, you're not. You're your sister's sister. And the reason why we have so much of this division is because of a couple things. One is we have this brokenness in our hearts and we don't even realize it. We can look the other way. That's what so many of us have done for the last almost 50 years, is we've looked the other way. So when we see racism, what allows it to continue is because we see it and we look the other way. Sexism, why does it persist? Because we see it and we look the other way. But today, in this place, we also have the opportunity to see the brokenness in our own hearts. And to say, God, can I be a William Wilberforce? Because I'm willing to dedicate the rest of my life so that slavery is not just illegal, it's inconceivable. Live the rest of my life so that abortion is not just illegal, it's inconceivable. To live my life in such a way that racism is not just illegal, it's inconceivable. And that begins, of course, by saying, I have the capacity to do great evil. But you also have the capacity to do great good. So go and do great good.